overhead, and then from the tracery of branches and leaves beneath him to the great sea of tree-tops and open country all around. But he could tell her nothing. He seemed dreamy and absent-minded, lying and staring at her as if he hardly knew who she was or what she was saying. His mind was still hovering near the border line of the two states of consciousness, like the region between sleeping and waking, where both worlds seem unreal and wholly wonderful. He could not answer her questions, but he evidently caught some reflex in her emotions, for he leaned towards her across the branches and said he was happy and never wanted to leave her. Then he crawled to the edge of the big bough and sprang out into the air with a shout of delight. He was the child again, the flying child, wild with the excitement of tearing through the night air at 50 miles an hour. The governess soon followed him, and they flew home together, taking a long turn by the sea and past the great chalk cliffs, where the sea sang loud beneath them. These lapses became with time more frequent, as well as of longer duration, and with them the boy noticed that the longing to escape became once again intense. He wanted to get home, wherever home was. He experienced a sort of nostalgia for the body, though he could not remember where that body lay. But when he asked the governess what this feeling meant, she only mystified him by her answers, saying that everyone, in the body or out of it, felt a deep longing for their final home, though they might not have the least idea where it lay, or even to be able to recognize, much less label, their longing. His normal feelings, too, were slowly returning to him. The older self became more and more submerged. As he approached the state of ordinary superficial consciousness, the characteristics of that state reflected themselves more and more in his thoughts and feelings. His memory still remained a complete blank, but he somehow felt that the things, places and people he wanted to remember had moved much nearer to him than before. Every day brought them more and more within his reach. "All these forgotten things will come back to me soon, I know," he said one day to the governess, "and then I'll tell you all about them." "Perhaps you'll remember me too then," she answered, a shadow passing across her face. Jimbo clapped his hands with delight. "Oh," he cried, "I should like to remember you, because that would make you a sort of two-people governess, and I should love you twice as much." But with the gradual return to former conditions, the feelings of age and experience grew dim and indefinite. His knowledge lessened, becoming obscure and confused, showing itself only in vague impressions and impulses, until at last it became quite the exception for the child consciousness to be broken through by flashes of intuition and inspiration from the more deeply hidden memories. For one thing, the deep horror of the empty house and its owner now returned to him with full force. Fear settled down again over the room, and lurked in the shadows over the yard. A vivid dread seized him of the other door in the room, the door through which the frightened children had disappeared, and which had never opened since. It gradually became for him a personality in the room, a staring, silent, listening thing, always watching, always waiting. One day it would open, and he would be caught. In a dozen ways like this the horrors of the house entered his heart and made him long for escape with all the force of his being. But the governess too seemed changing. She was becoming more vague and more mysterious. Her face was always sad now, and her eyes wistful. Her manner became restless and uneasy, and in many little ways the child could not fail to notice that her mind was intent upon other things. He begged her to name the day of the final flight, but she always seemed to have some good excuse for putting it off. "I feel frightened when you don't tell me what's going on," he said to her. "It's the preparations for the last flight," she answered. "The flight of escape. He'll try to prevent us going together, so that you should get lost. But it's better you shouldn't know too much," she added. "Trust me and have patience." "Oh, that's what you're so afraid of," he said. "Separation." He was very proud indeed of the long word, and said it over several times to himself. And the governess, looking out of the window at the fading sunlight, repeated to herself more than to him the word he was so proud of. "Yes, that's what I'm so afraid of. Separation. But if it means your salvation—" And her sentence remained unfinished as her eyes wandered far above the tops of the trees into the shadows of the sky. And Jimbo, drawn by the sadness of her voice, turned towards the window and noticed to his utter amazement that he could see right through her. He could see the branches of the trees through her body. But the next instant she turned and was no longer transparent, and before the boy could say a word she crossed the room and disappeared downstairs through the trap-door. End of chapter 15